cannot do this show without you, and this thank you comes not only from me, but from Max Thompson and Kevin Burns, the creator of the series. We are all so grateful for you. Please do keep watching and keep coming back.
I don't know, it's weird stuff, and Buzz Aldrin went, and there is this alleged tweet that he pumped out about how he'd been terrified.
It's been rescinded, right?
It has been. Well, you can delete tweets, so who knows. And I mean, the other thing too is what the fascinating thing to me the most is Nazi Germany. Why did the Nazis go there? And this Raiders of the Lost Ark stuff, that's all real. Hitler really was after all of these different spiritual type of artifacts. He really thought it would give them power. The Germans, a lot of their rocket research was also supplemented with channeling and seances and stuff. So the Germans were into this. They went there and claimed these massive areas of land. They called it New Schwabenland. And interestingly, like as late as 1999 on National, what's the geological survey? U.S. Geological Survey maps of Antarctica, the area was still called New Schwabenland. So it's legally, the Germans went there. What were they doing? What bases did they build? We've all heard the stories. So to me, the reason why Antarctica is up is just because it's an uncharted continent. It's an unknown place. We don't know what's there, and there's a lot of mystery around it.
Yeah, and it has a lot of scientific value also. Because the thing about you got this big, full continent that's not covered with trees and buildings and people and stuff. So if asteroids, meteorites hit there, small ones, we don't want big ones. But if meteorites hit there, we have to find them and then use them for, because that's where we think, the Mars meteorites that we found, maybe they found it in Antarctica. And then there's also, that thing that comes out and gets in your body and turns into the big tendrils and
alien facehugger, right there too.
But seriously, it's a really intriguing kind of untouched laboratory. Mm-hmm. So that's why scientists go there and study it a lot. And it seems to be a place that they can study effects immediately on the environment, on the atmosphere, on the surface, and because if you keep in mind they're at a pole, so it's going to be a hole in the magnetic shield that we have around the Earth, so they'll see more of things like the solar wind coming through,
right?
Things like that.
You could even, I would think, be able to be an interesting place to do some medical experiments on the effects of basically very thin magnetic fields. Maybe for astronauts that would go to Mars, how are you affected by the radiation? Because the South Pole, there's very little ozone in the atmosphere. There are a lot of radiation leaks through that doesn't leak through at the equator.
I think one really interesting thing about Antarctica for me is the complex series of legal treaties and other agreements that govern its use. Now, the original Antarctic Treaty is part of something wider called the Antarctic Treaty System. There are a number of countries that are full signatories. There are other countries that are partial signatories and have, for example, reserved the right to make territorial claims. There are other countries who have not signed at all. And all of this comes up for renegotiation in 2048. But there are many political commentators who see, with what's going on in the world right now in terms of geopolitics, the idea that might break down long before 2048. And so the question arises, for example, what if one country sort of made a bid to permanently annex this? What could others do in terms of deterrence or enforcement of any of that? But going back to the central mystery part of that, I think obviously Linda Moulton Howe has been a real champion of putting into the public domain a lot of material about this, and you, I'm sure, find a lot of information on her website where she's been contacted by various people. The bottom line boils down to, I think, a suspicion that I can sum up in 3 words. They found something.
And it's interesting you say they found something, because there's something called the Piri-Reis map, and if you guys saw our Antarctic episode, you're quite well aware of that, but if any of you guys can address the idea that the Piri-Reis map depicts Antarctica as not being covered in ice, and what might that suggest?
Well, I mean, okay, if the estimates are correct that basically Antarctica has been at the South Pole, there can be physical pole shifts. They have happened in human history, but apparently not for a long time. then what that would mean is that there was a time when Antarctica was ice-free. And of course, the only way you would be able to really map that continent would probably be from space or from the sky. So it implies, if that map is legitimate, it certainly implies that somebody had seen Antarctica from the air in the days before it was covered with ice, which would go back millions of years, which would mean somebody was able to fly around the planet, a long, long time ago. Probably not us.
Yeah, that kind of ties into Operation Highjump, right? So right after World War II, we still believe that the Nazis may have had a splinter group in a base somewhere in Antarctica. So Admiral Byrd took this fleet. I mean, it was a big fleet of naval vessels. They go through with icebreakers and so on. They get there, and then you don't really know what happened until he's on his way back from there sometime later, and he tells some reporters while he's in Argentina or somewhere like that. He tells them that they basically got their butts kicked, and that there were these people there who had technologies that could fly from pole to pole in less than a day. And what?
Right. He said that was the biggest threat that we faced in the future was fast, these incredibly fast-moving technologies from somewhere else.
And it's really interesting on an episode of Ancient Aliens where we talked about this. We actually show where we have an image from one of the satellites at GEO that it shows a contrail that stretches from pole to pole, and that means it's in the atmosphere because the contrail's got to be in the atmosphere, right? And a contrail only lasts 15 minutes to an hour at best. We don't have any aerospace vehicles that will travel from pole to pole in that amount of time, which is a really intriguing piece of new data that we've discovered.
Now, Mike, you've written several books about anomalies on Mars and on the Moon. Talk to me about some of the anomalies that we found in Antarctica.
Well, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, it's fascinating because people are finding more and more stuff on Google Earth, Google Maps. They're looking at all these pictures of Antarctica. And there are these weird sort of blank spots where, again, you're not allowed to see anything. But lately, a few years ago, there was somebody who spotted what looks like a pyramid, and it absolutely looks like it's got four sides. It's got the triangular facets to it, 4 sides to it, and comes to a very sharp point, buried under the ice. The one thing I will say is that when you're looking at pictures of Mars, there are a lot of pyramidal-looking objects on Mars. Now, mountains can be pyramidal, but if they are going to be pyramidal, they're usually part of a mountain chain. So how I would evaluate it when I'm doing a book on Mars or doing some research on Mars would be, okay, if this is a pyramidal shape in isolation, basically by itself and not part of a mountain chain, I take it a lot more seriously that we might be looking at a pyramid. The one thing I will say about the pyramid in Antarctica is that it does appear to be at the end of a mountain chain. But again, what would be the reason? How would it erode into a pyramidal shape naturally? Because if it's if the wind just happened to be like right over that point of the pyramid, as it would swirl around to shave out those sides, it would erase the other edges that it had already formed earlier. So wind-blown formations they're circular or they're round. They're all rounded up because the wind is always swirling around. So what's the formation? What's the formation mechanism for that particular pyramid? Although, again, it is near the end of a mountain chain, so it's interesting but suspicious. We also had a picture of something that looks like a face, people are saying, in the side of a mountain, like a big carved face. Again, reminds me of the face on Mars a little bit, but it's also part of a mountain, so I don't really know what it is, what that is. It could just be sort of an optical illusion. People think they're seeing a face, although that's not a real thing. People talk about pareidolia. There's no such thing as that. But it does appear to be something that could be a carved face, but again, I would be more inclined to think it was really cool if it was in isolation, like the face on Mars is kind of all by itself. Now there's one other thing, Dave, we talked about, which is this object that looks like a big, long, cigar-shaped UFO, I guess, very similar to a Muamua that somebody has found, that you can actually see where it hit the ground and then slid down, I guess it's a glacier, in Antarctica and came to a rest. And I don't know what the hell that is. From an engineering standpoint, when I see something cylindrical, I think somebody built it. That's my tendency to that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't also talk about the big door.
Well, yeah.
There's a big opening. It's got a big giant door on it. It looks like from Google Earth. You know.
Yeah, and that's also a fascinating artifact. So, of course, the door turned out to have had David Hatcher Childress' face on it. I don't know why I brought this. I thought Dave was going to be here. I screwed up. I was going to ask him to autograph that for him.
I think there's a really interesting point here. Whatever one thinks about climate change and global warming, there's no getting away from the fact that the ice seems to be melting. And if there is something down there, if there's something that's been hidden and someone has found something, but at the moment they're keeping it secret, as the ice melts, I mean, common sense, more and more of this will be revealed. And I don't mean to be glib in this remark, but for those of you who like sci-fi movies and remember John Carpenter's version of The Thing, thawing out something you find in Antarctica isn't necessarily a good idea.
Well, I don't know. I mean, we talked about Admiral Byrd briefly. I mean, the interesting thing about that mission project, Operation Highjump, is that basically the Nazi area in Schwabenland, and of course there's all the rumors about secret bases and all that stuff, was at one end of the continent. I'd like to say the north end, but there is no north, south, east, west really in Antarctica. And basically his a fleet landed at the opposite end, set up their base, and then they did what you would say in a military sense is a classic double pincer maneuver, hitting that base from both sides, and then a few weeks later they left more than a month early, 6 weeks early, and these crazy stories came out about how they got attacked by flying saucers when they tried to enter the base. So it's a strange, crazy place.
Yeah, there's even crazy stories. You can't actually follow the chain of custody of the story to say it did come from someone in Operation Highjump, but it's always somebody's grandpa or something. But they fought these creatures when they went into the underground base, and they were like they were bigger than people, and they were hairy. I mean, it was all kind. I mean, it's all the stories you ever thought of in sci-fi movies. There's stories about Operation Highjump, whatever happened when they found this Nazi base.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what they thought it might have been was some sort of genetic experiments that the Nazis were doing.
They had a tendency to do those. Yeah, they were. It's really not funny. I shouldn't allow this to make me uncomfortable. They certainly were doing that kind of thing, and it would be someplace where the world would not be able to catch wind of what they were up to.
And another recent discovery about Antarctica that's really weird is so all the time from space right now we're being bombarded with subatomic particles called muons. They come from the super massive black hole at the center of our galaxy, and they hit the upper atmosphere, and then they'll decay and become other things. And so they're always coming from space. Well, NASA was doing this experiment where they had a high-altitude balloon over Antarctica looking for particles coming through that hole in the magnetic bubble that we were talking about. And they discovered that muons are coming up out of the ground from Antarctica. And there's no laws of physics or knowledge of physics that suggest why that would be the case. We don't know where they're coming from and why they're coming from. And it's some whole new concept that we're going to have to come up with just to explain what those things are.
Maybe there's a little teeny black hole in the middle of the Earth at the center. Maybe the Earth has just been expanding.
Well, but if it was at the center, the muons would be coming from all directions from the Earth.
Oh, true.
So something is directing them, and they're coming up from just that continent, right? It's weird.
We talked about Linda Moulton Howe's work. Guys, you know that Linda has brought forward multiple whistleblowers, former military officers, who have reported that they have witnessed an underground site, an underground base with extreme technology at Antarctica. If there are multiple government occupations on this site, why would it be in their interest to protect us from knowing more?
Well, because they'd have to rewrite the history books, first of all.
That's actually be a good thing because they get to sell all new history books.
They get to sell all, yeah. Again, why is it in their interest to keep these things from us? It's not in their interest, it's in their nature. Secrecy is a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense of that when you keep things secret, you tend to think, oh, if I know this, knowledge is power. Well, Game of Thrones, I think it was Cersei who said, knowledge isn't power, power is power. But people think that if they can contain this information, that somehow it gives them an advantage over others. I suppose if you could exploit technology out of that's a possibility. But when I hear these stories, they're like interesting stories. They're fascinating. I don't know. I can't put my finger on any of them. And these advanced civilizations. I mean, I've had people that I trust, that I use, tell me there's two not human civilizations inside the Earth, and one of the ways in there, the easy access routes, is through Antarctica under the ice. But I can't put any solid evidence to support that.
Well, I think that technology acquisition lies at the absolute heart of government secrecy on UFOs. And this is a point I've made before, but it's worth repeating. The nation on Earth, or maybe these days corporation, that first acquires, understands, and replicates that technology will be the dominant force on this planet for the foreseeable future. So when you ask the question, why would they keep it secret? I think it is for that reason. And maybe if they have found something, everyone's kind of figuring out how to make it work, what applications it may have. And it's almost like, if you'll excuse the dreadful pun, this being Antarctica, but it's like a new Cold War. And we need a thawing of relations here. Someone needs to break the ice. But seriously, technology acquisition and the race to acquire that technology is why I think even among allies, information wouldn't necessarily be shared with each other, let alone make it public. Because once you make it public, you can't get the genie back into the bottle.
Yeah, I argue that Apollo, basically everything but Apollo 11, was a technology acquisition salvaging mission. That's basically what they went there to do, is to go grab Colorado Anunnaki technology, bring it back and reverse engineer it. So if we were willing to go 239,000 miles away to get this technology, if we found some in Antarctica, I would think we'd be more than willing to go down there and get it. It'd be easier to get it from there, I suppose.
Keep arguing that, Mike.
I won't. Successful.
Well, so if you think about it from this perspective, let's pick a technology. Let's pick Velcro, for example. Most people think it was invented for the space program. It wasn't. It was just invented about the time of the space program. But they made great use of it in the space program. But if you discovered something like the next Velcro, like it's a super glue that you can make it work when it works and work when it don't, when you don't want it to, whatever. All right, even the knowledge of that would give whichever country has the intellectual property rights to that an amazing economic boom, right? And now if it's an entire civilization or a base or something like that underneath the ice, there could be millions of these little things that are worth hundreds of millions or maybe billions of dollars each. And then that makes you an economic superpower, not just a technological superpower. So it all comes down to who's going to have the power.
Well, right, but then again, the question becomes: okay, let's say all this technology exists under the ice in Antarctica. That there's all this stuff there that we've heard about. Whose is it? I mean, is this alien?
Who gets there first? I guess.
Yeah, but I don't mean whose is it now. I mean, where'd it come from? And again, is it the Atlantis model? Is it the whole thing where, we go from, did we really go from stupid cavemen with our stone knives and bearskins to smart old us with our striped toothpaste and our hydrogen bombs in one straight line? Or did we go up and down and up and down? That's the question. And I'm just curious, like, if it wasn't human technology, let's use the Atlantis model. We humans think a certain way. We have a certain way we process information. I would think we'd be able to figure out who these smart guys were and their technology, what they did back in the day, 12, 15,000 years ago. But if it was alien technology, developed by an alien mind, a truly extraterrestrial mind, would we be able to even understand what the principles were?
Yeah, so I tell this to people just to make the point. If you took your cell phone to 1947 and crashed it in Roswell, New Mexico, and gave it to the top Nobel Prize scientist of the world right then, they would have no idea what it was.
I just...
As soon as the power went out, they would then, number one, it won't be getting a signal. right? Then the battery runs dead, the screen would go out. What they would do is they would then start taking pieces of it after they took all the pictures and everything they could, and they would actually put it into a mass chromatograph to figure out what elements are in it. So they would know what it's made of, but they wouldn't know how in the hell to make it do what it did, because they couldn't. They might could reproduce the 12 volts DC that they needed to do, right? But they would not be able to reproduce the information, digital signal to go in there. And they have no idea what a microprocessor is yet, because it hadn't been invented. We're still in vacuum tubes. They didn't even have a scanning electron microscope yet to look at it and see that there were chips on it. So it would take 50 years to reverse engineer a cell phone. And you'd have to create the infrastructure to do it.
And amazingly, the cell phone appeared exactly 50 years after Roswell, folks. Back in 47, we knew what telephones were. We knew there was communication. We would have been able to figure out this is some kind of communication.
Well, that's true. We would know that.
Now,
we know how it worked.
If you took the cell phone back to the Roman Empire, they wouldn't have had a clue what its purpose was. So this reverse engineering thing, I mean, once you know that there's extraterrestrials and you know that they figured out a way to travel faster than light and come here, it's a whole different thing, because your mind is open to the possibility of what it could be. So
it depends how wide you think the technology gap is. And I made earlier in a different presentation, I said in a universe nearly 14 billion years old, it's statistically unlikely that the first civilizations we interact with will be sort of 50 or 100 years ahead of us. More likely it'll be millions. And the Astronomer Royal in the UK, Sir Martin Rees, made a really great analogy about this in terms of trying to understand extraterrestrials in terms of thought processes or even technology. And he said it might be like trying to explain quantum physics to a chimpanzee.
Yeah, I mean, if Thor brought Mjolnir and set it down right here and said, you can have it, right? And it would take so long to figure out how to reverse engineer that thing, right? Because it's so far advanced beyond us. And we don't know, how does it stay there? What's the propulsion system? How does it know if you're worthy or not? How does it know, what to do? All these things.
Well, I mean, of course, we're worthy.
Nick, question for you. There have been many reports of UFO sightings in the Antarctic region. I imagine most of these reports would come from military personnel stationed there, but what can you tell us about the history of these sightings?
Not a huge amount, because when I was running the British government's UFO program, although obviously we had some UK scientists down there, I can't recall receiving a single report back there. My terms of reference were restricted to investigating UFO reports within the UK air defence region. Now, it's important to remember, of course, that the main purpose under the Antarctic Treaty System, the main purpose of the original, you could say that it's kind of gone a little off track, but the original purpose of all this was to preserve Antarctica, in terms of science, and to actually say that it belongs to no single nation state, but in one sense to the peoples of the world. Now, maybe that's, like I say, gone a little astray. There have been sightings there. Some of those probably come from the scientific community, but they didn't go to the Ministry of Defense. And that's interesting, because when you look at the multinational group of people that have been down there over the years, there is a real question about not just who owns Antarctica or who owns anything that's found there, but who owns the information. And UFO sightings count as information. I mean, information is a word that we hear a lot about these days in terms of its economic worth, and everything is boiled down to information. UFO sightings, we must not forget, it's information. But there is a real dogfight over who actually has that.
Mike, can you address this cover-up that he's referring to?
No, not really.
So I actually have a piece that I think is pertinent to it, with what you said. So while they don't know who's in charge, they all seem to abide by the no-fly zone.
Yeah.
And they don't go in there for whatever reason. Why? And who's making this rule up? I mean, where does this come from?
Well, yeah, and I mean, remember, officially the moon is not supposed to be claimed by anyone. Everybody has access to the moon. Anybody that goes there, nobody can stake a claim. We're not. Somebody recently tried to claim he owned Mars and got kind of slapped down on that. And the same thing applies to Antarctica. So it's very odd that governments. We can't even agree on how much the dollar is worth worldwide, right? How do governments agree that Antarctica is something that will be basically, not exploited, but explored and used for the benefit of all mankind? And why do they cooperate? There has to be something, to my mind, there has to be something so incredibly overwhelming there for everybody to agree, oh yeah, we'll agree to those terms. There has to be something scary. I mean, the Buzz Aldrin story is really weird. It's really weird. He talked about, I don't know if you guys know this, supposedly when he went to Antarctica, suddenly he came back.
Having a heart attack.
The story is that he had a heart attack, although there's not really, nobody's seen his EKG, so we don't really know if he had a heart attack. But, apparently he did tweet out, I've seen the face of terror and it's, horrendous or something, and then he deleted the tweet. That's the story. And when he went to Antarctica, and again, there's something there, there's something going on. It's something that makes it different.
It's all Megatron.
All right, folks, it's time to open up for your questions. If you have a question you'd like to ask of our panel, please step up to the front of the microphone here. We ask that you kindly state your name and get to your question as quickly as possible so that as many people as can will ask. Hi, what's your name? Hold on just a second.
My name is Martha.
Hi, Martha.
I'm wondering if any of you have seen any geological surveys. So I know that pole orientation is recorded in the geological record because when there's volcanic eruptions, any magnetic elements in the lava orients itself to the poles at that time. And I was wondering if you've read any surveys that would support the Piri Reis map showing Antarctica being in a different orientation related to a different pole position based on what we have in the geologic record.
No, I have not. There is evidence that there have been some significant pole shifts in the past, maybe physical pole shifts. In other words, the radial axis about which did I say that right? Anyway, sounded good. Around which the planet rotates, which means there could have been a time when Antarctica was more towards the equator and the ice melted and all that stuff. These are cyclical things. But I think the closest I came was like 55 million years ago that had happened. So I'm not aware of any records like that.
Yeah, so the records are actually the bottom of the ocean floor, and the Navy knew this for a long time during the Cold War, classified, because they didn't want anyone to realize that they were using them for navigation purposes under the water. So when the shelves hit each other, one layer is pushed up and it's magma, and as it hardens, the magnetic materials in it, iron and so on, they align with the magnetic direction of the Earth. And for some reason, we know from the growth rate of this magma how long it took. And so it's something like every 50 or 60 million years, the north and south poles of the Earth flip. We don't know if it's a physical flip or if it's just a magnetic field.
Yeah, we think it's magnetic, right?
Yeah, it could be the ball inside the Earth that we think is a big molten core flipped inside or something, or turned. We don't know what caused that, but we know it does happen periodically, and there's stripes, magnetic stripes in the bottom of the ocean floor that have an alternate magnetic field orientation.
I'm really glad you're on this panel, by the way.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi guys. I went to Google Earth once, actually a few times, and I found they showed a hole, not all the time. Like I was looking at I work nights. I was looking at around 3 in the morning, and it shows a spot there. But they were showing a hole, and actually, like I was doing it, and it showed a hole in Antarctica, and then I Googled it and said that it was the size of Manhattan. Do you know anything about it?
Where was the hole?
In Antarctica. And like it shows, when you go to Google, I downloaded the app, it shows Antarctica, and I went there, and it showed a big hole that shows there. It didn't show all the nights I checked it, and it was covered like with like a cloud, and you couldn't see it. It has to be like around 3, like early in the morning, and in Google it actually showed, and when you Google, and it said that it was the size of Manhattan. It was like, it shows like you can actually tell there was a hole there.
There is a depression in the ice. We don't know exactly how big it is. There have been varying reports. I hadn't heard that it's the size of Manhattan, but that depression is something that needs further study. That's not something we've yet covered on the show, but stay tuned, it could come.
All right, thank you.
And you know, there's things on Google. I mean, Google Sky had this blacked out area around Sirius for a while and around some other stars where there's just a big black block there where people said, oh, that's where Nibiru is. And then I think it reappeared, somebody painted on, you know, something that looks like the winged disc and Nibiru. I think the guys at Google are just joshing us, but you know, those things do happen on those programs and they might need something, so pay attention.
Hello, sir, what's your name?
My name is David. Back in the Middle Ages, many artists depicted people who were considered as saints as having an aura about them. Around the 1970s, there was a photography technique known as Carillion photography. And using this technique, the perimeter of the human body seemed to have an aura. Even people that had missing limbs, this field, this phenomena, seemed to continue to exist for a period of time. So, Travis, you are our electric, physicist guru. I'll direct the question to you. Did the ancients, in the Middle Ages know something intuitively, and is there technology here that you're familiar with?
Yeah, I remember seeing when I was a kid and some books akin to books like Chariots of the Gods that these people were taking these pictures that have the aura around it, but I never did see exactly what was special about their cameras.
Well, it's basically an electrified plate, and you place your fingers on the electrified plate, and then he was able to somehow do a photograph, like a static electricity.
Like a bit of fax.
And it's called Carillion photography. It was invented by a guy named Carillion, and I did some research into this for a book I did in 2010 called The Choice, and you know, it's pretty interesting because there was one where you had couples. A couple that was, in love and said, okay, speak really lovingly to each other. So they were like, oh, I love you so much, you're so sweet, and blah, 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 blah. And their fingers were close together, and the aura around it, or whatever, the electrical charge, turned into like a red color, and their auras joined. And then he had them scream and yell at each other and say bad things, you just say bad, call each other names, and their colors both turned different colors, and there was like a line that literally was like a blue wall of electricity, and he's recording some sort of electrostatic interference. I don't know the exact process I explained in the book. It does exist, and they took a leaf, they cut the leaf, they put the leaf down on the plate, and you can see the rest of the leaf that they cut off.
I mean, in relation to the medieval and Middle Age paintings, there's a separate debate about some of the anomalies or apparent anomalies in these artworks, and there are some famous pictures which purport to show UFOs. I don't know the answer to this, but there is a real debate. Some people say, yes, these are literal representations of UFOs, and with what you mentioned, maybe auras. Others say, no, this is simply an artistic technique to show like divinity, sainthood, a manifestation of the Holy Spirit or something. So there are two sides to that theory.
But again, it does seem to consistently change color and aspects of it with changes in mood and personality. Yeah, so that's weird.
Thank you. Hi, come on up.
What's that? Oh.
Hi, what's your question? What's your name first?
Gigi. Hi, good afternoon. And at the last Alien Con, Linda talked about some former military had gone underground and seen some kind of hieroglyphs that were football fields large, supposedly, and I was wondering if there's any more information on that, and you can comment on that.
I mean, I can speak to that. Linda's continuing her research. And if you check on earthfiles.com, her website, I don't know that there's anything posted that's new, but she has told me that she's working towards new information there. She has a lot yet to tell. So do stay tuned. When that information is given to us, you can bet it'll be on the show.
It's very interesting, I think.
It is.
Love the conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'm Gina. I just wanted to know if you all knew the connection between Antarctica and Agartha. Is there an entrance, and has anyone experienced it?
I think you stumped the panel.
I should know what Agartha is. I don't. I don't know.
Okay.
That, so sorry.
Well, can you elaborate a little bit?
I was curious if there was an entrance like through Agartha.
Okay. There are stories that the Nazis, took their U-boats into under the ice in the Schwabenland and did find an entrance. Agartha is the subterranean kingdom or whatever, right?
Right.
Okay. That story comes from the Project Highjump period, where there are these different stories in different publications from the time, from the 1930s, that they supposedly found an entrance to an underground kingdom that was lush and there was light somehow, and it was basically like an entire civilization, and they told the Nazis they were extraterrestrials and stuff, and nobody knows if they were or not. But, Hermann Oberth, the father of German rocketry, who's a really cheery guy if you've ever seen a picture of him. And Werner von Braun was his protege, his engineering protege. Werner was his, Travis Taylor. He said flat out, he said flat out when he was asked in an interview, how did you guys make all these incredible technological advances like the jet engine and the V2 rocket? And he said, we had help. And they asked him from who? And he said, the people of other worlds. So where they met those people of other worlds, I don't know. He also, we can, somebody over here might be smirking over my shoulder, I don't know, but, Eric von Daniken, I've had, if you are around Eric, you'll have a glass of wine with him, pretty much, it happens. And I asked him, remember before Eric was the Chariots of the Gods guy, he managed a hotel in Switzerland, and one of his guests was Hermann Oberth. And one of the things that got Eric going, he told me, this is direct first-person testimony. I'm now creating hearsay, but Eric told me, he told me and Linda and a couple other people who were sitting there having some wine, that Hermann Oberth had come to his hotel in the late 1960s, that he'd stayed there, and he said, so, Mike, I asked him, was this story true? That's it. I'm working on my Eric impersonation. And he said, yeah. That Hermann Oberth told him face to face that that interview was correct and that they did have help from people of other worlds. Agartha, I guess, is the name of there's supposed to be two internal civilizations living in the hollows of the earth. So, I don't know if that entrance is anywhere, but I do know that I still think that the Schwabenland, that area, you can't go explore there. Is that correct? Yeah, do we know?
No, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that'd be an interesting thing to find out, whether that's kind of off limits or not.
Well, the rabbi told me a story. It's from, I forget whichever religious text that he quoted, because he knows every religious text
in the world. Yeah.
But he was telling me about how there is this civilization inside the earth, that the rabbis of the world know this as a fact. So I'm just saying this. I don't know if he means it as a spiritual, place in the middle of the world, if it's actually a real physical thing, but that's what he said. So that's interesting.
Just curious. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, come on up.
Hi, Briley.
It's Briley again. Hi, Briley. Welcome back. What's your question?
So you guys seem to know a lot about Antarctica, and have you guys been there? And if not, do you want to?
I have not been. I think that unless you are a scientist and you make a bid to get a particular project there, it's very difficult. About the nearest you can do is one of these whale watching cruises that goes right down there. I'd love to go, and if you do an episode down there,
You'll have to fight off Linda Moulton, Howe, and David Childers.
Ancient Aliens cruise through Antarctica.
There you go. So I'm actually going to talk, and I haven't been to Antarctica either, but it would be places where there are high strangeness, you're supposed to go and see what's there, right? But what we could do is we could do a high altitude balloon experiment that would float over Antarctica for a long time, and we could put our own scientific payload on there, which could be cameras and sensors and so on. Designed by ancient aliens. Right? And it could be a payload, and that would be a reason to go and retrieve the payload and to launch the payload.
All right, so Bradley, if we do that next season, you coming with us?
Absolutely.
All right.
That's the right spirit, girl.
All right, next question.
Hi guys, my name's Amanda. Just wondering if you could shed any light on whether or not the Russians actually found organism 46B, a killer octopus that can mimic a human diver and then paralyze them with a poison and then eat them.
I read that on one of the stupid search engines that takes over your web browser and it comes up and gives you news stuff that you don't know where it comes from.
You gotta move on from Windows 3.1, dude.
Right.
They still have 3.1.
Travis, that happens when you browse those sorts of websites.
But I saw that story and I looked at it too and I was like, is this real or is this just or was it clickbait? And I wasn't sure.
Because I mean, octopus can camouflage and can turn into really different things,
the
and I
story's
just wondered
crazy.
if there was any truth to it.
I googled around and I didn't see any scientific papers about it, so I was guessing it was clickbait, but I'm not sure.
There is an episode of Ancient Aliens that goes into that, isn't there?
Yes, we did one called They Came from the Sea, and you saw Giorgio go to England to meet with a scientist, Dr. Queenie Chan. That episode was mostly about water and meteorites, but another part of that episode that's really interesting is a study proposed by Dr. Chandra Wickramasinghe. Say that 3 times. This doctor proposes that octopus are not of this earth, that they came here on a meteorite. So if octopuses are aliens, maybe the clickbait has something to it.
If they're hiding out in Russia, I mean, maybe they're...
And I'll just tell you a little amusing Ancient Aliens production story, but the fun we had over figuring out whether it was octopuses or octopi.
Yeah, one of the keys about, I think I either filmed for that episode or was in that episode, because I do remember talking about the DNA of the octopus not being very similar to DNA of any other creature on Earth. Right. And so it's just really weird.
Did they spring out of the Cambrian explosion?
It was actually after them. They're very recent creatures.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
All right. Do we have any more questions?
Hi, America. I'm Briley Zan.
Hi, Briley Zan. What's your name?
She's the well-known one. She's winning Alien Con. I'm just telling you. But I just have a quick question. If each of you had to choose, what would be your top most compelling piece of evidence that there is something more happening on Antarctica? What would be your one piece of evidence that you think is most compelling?
Meaning that we already know about?
Yeah, absolutely. Not kind of projecting a thing. I just want to know what you know.
I would say that it's the high-level visits that have been mentioned, because those sorts of people don't go anywhere without a darn good reason. And at that level, particularly, for example, at election time, there are many, many more productive things to be doing. So when you have senior figures, whether they're politicians, former astronauts, whoever they are, all suddenly taking an interest in this one geographical location, all going down there, and sometimes cryptic tweets that then get deleted and denied and debated, that to me is, I think, what I would answer.
I agree. I think that's really, Nick stole my answer. That would be my first answer, is just the behavior of, and again, not politicians, but government officials at that time, is, why would you go there if it wasn't to meet with Moloch the lizard king? I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But the other thing, the next piece beyond that that's really compelling, again, is Operation Highjump, and the way it was clearly set up to establish a base at the opposite end of Antarctica, and then there's this military-style attack where the Nazis had been, where they'd set up their bases. So something was going on there, and I think that those pieces together are the things that I just find really compelling, things we talked about.
To me, one that's repeatable, and we're repeating it continuously, are these muons coming from the surface of Antarctica, because we cannot physically explain it. There is no scientific theory that tells us why that's there, unless it's something like a miniature black hole that's directing them coming out of there or something, and that's physics that we can't even fathom. So there's something crazy going on there, and that's the evidence for me.
I think Riley has something else. Oh, she just came to support me.
Oh, nice.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. All right, next question.
Afternoon, gentlemen. This is to David as well as everybody else. It's not just Antarctic related, but in general for the entire show. Are there any good, interesting bloopers or practical jokes or anecdotes you had happen that you can feel comfortable talking about at this event?
Yes, the day that Giorgio's hair went flat.
I'd like to see that.
I have a funny story which I think I can share. Giorgio and I went to the UK to do an episode called, I think, The Secrets of Rudloe Manor.
Mystery of Rudloe Manor.
Mystery of Rudloe Manor. I do apologize. Anyway, so as part of that episode, we actually looked into a story about an alleged UFO crash in Wales in the early 70s. And one of the witnesses, who was a child at the time, but recalled that there was, the official explanation for this, by the way, was that there was an earthquake and simultaneously a meteor. So, but this witness is now a farmer. So Giorgio and I went to interview this farmer. And of course, we set up the story, did the interview in the farmyard. And in the background, there was a cow. Kind of, So Giorgio asks this, and he's absolutely on point. He's telling the story. He's asking a really eloquent question, and he turns to the farmer and says, "So, what do you think about that?" The farmer opens his mouth, and the cow gives the loudest moo I've ever heard in my life. And all of us, Giorgio, me, the farmer, everyone on the film crew, just collapsed in laughter. And we of course had to do the whole thing again and hope that the cow was going to stay quiet. Now, I hope that at some stage the producers will do a kind of blooper tape, and I sure as heck hope that's on there.
Can we get you guys to reload an entire hour at the end of the season for just a blooper reel?
That would be up to history, and a few of those people are here, so I suggest you take it up with them.
I would say that there is a very remote possibility that there might be some footage stored somewhere at Prometheus or in History Channel archives of various members of the cast answering questions in the voice of David thousands of these shots out there. Would be some kind of.
Well, I don't know. I just tried. I went to interview Eric a few years ago, and I said, Eric, you ready to do the interview? He said, can we do it in German? And I said, German? I would love to do it in German, but this is for an American audience, and then it'll go worldwide, and you'll be dubbed. And he goes, Scheiße English. I don't want to say what that means, but
Shit on English is that?
Yeah. Thank you.
Shit on
Any
English.
other questions?
My name is still David.
Hi, David.
If extraterrestrials are from such advanced civilizations, why are there UFOs crashing on Earth?
Okay, I'll take this one because exactly the same question came up at my Ask Me Anything. My answer to that is because I don't think even a really advanced civilization will ever hit a point in time and progress where, for example, parts won't fail, mental fatigue won't kick in, human, or shall we say pilot error or computer error won't kick in. And so I don't think there is ever a magical point where things just don't go wrong.
How do you know that there wasn't some other aliens that didn't shoot them down or something, right? Or how do you know it wasn't the teenagers that stole Dad's car? They're out drinking, having a good time, you know, cruising in the backwaters. Because you gotta stay off the main roads, the cops will get you. And then, bang, right off the road into a tree.
My grandmother, who had a 5th grade education, used to say, you become like the people you hang around with. Maybe the UFOs have been hanging around people too long.
Well, I mean, I think there's a bit of a conflict there, because I don't see how you can have metal fatigue and an inertial dampening field at the same time. I think that's kind of a problem. But, you know, there's a theory that a lot of these crashes are not accidents, that they are deliberate crashes, that it's almost a sacrifice, that these individual beings, the Evans, whatever they are in the that they agreed to, you know, crash the saucers to Earth to sort of give us an indication that we're here, and without doing the whole land on the White House lawn thing, and allow us to process what we found. So that's a possibility. That
sounds too altruistic.
Yeah, it does sound. And the thing is, you know, look, I mean, aliens, they're probably just like people. There's probably good ones and bad ones. You know, you just don't want to run into the bad ones.
I'm telling you, their dad told them if they weren't first or last. They learned that racing's rubbing. And they bumped one too many times and they crashed.
Travis's son was playing in a soccer tournament, and they were fighting for 3rd place. And I said, you know, Travis, 3rd place is the second loser, right? So
Thank you, David. All right. Folks, that is time for us. We'd like to thank you for coming to this panel. Thank you for World of the Ancient Aliens.
His biological dad turns out to be the secret.